Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 8-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. It's going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players and cover other sports as well. We have NASCAR going on, which is my big thing I do on YouTube. It's my favorite thing, to be honest. I absolutely love NASCAR and I love MLB. We also have NBA coming back. Now, I'm still up in the air on NBA if I want to do daily videos because it can be pretty time consuming to do daily MLB videos and NASCAR when that comes out, but I do like the NBA. I play it every single day, and I'm 100% doing Patreon content for it, but I'm still up in the air debating if I want to do the daily NBA videos. So we'll see. I might post a video, I might not, but either way, if you guys are going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. You can also follow me over on Twitter. I'm at ChrisPennell16. You can follow me on IG at CPenn16. And if you want to support my content on Patreon, that's always much appreciated. Now, if you are interested, the link is in the description below. But since it's the very end of the month, I would wait till the first of the month so you guys don't get double charged. So if you're interested, like I said, links in the description below. If you're not, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So at pitcher, it's not as good of a pitching slate as we had yesterday. We had a lot of good options: Brandon Woodruff, Andrew Heaney, Garrett Cole, Jacob deGrom, Chris Paddock. But we still have some decent options here. It's not as strong as a pitching slate, but I still like some of the guys. Now, I will mention J.A. Happ is $10,800, which I think is an absolute insane price tag. Does he have a good matchup versus the Orioles? Sure, but I don't want to pay that much for J.A. Happ. I mean, I can get Shane Bieber, who's obviously much better than Happ at $9,800. Now, the matchup sucks for Bieber, but I'm going to trust the talent more than I am with J.A. Happ, and I guess we'll pretty much just get into it. So Shane Bieber, he is my ace of the slate. He comes in at $9,800, which I think is a pretty fair price tag for him. But the only thing that I don't like about Bieber is the matchup, and that is a very tough one for Mr. Bieber going up against Minnesota, one of the best teams in the entire league. They have a prolific offense, just a ton of big boppers in their lineup. You got Nelson Cruz, Max Kepler, Eddie Rosario, Josh Donaldson, Jorge Polanco. You got a couple guys on the back end that aren't too bad. You also have Mitch Garver. So they're a very loaded lineup, and it's not usually a team I would like to use pitchers against. But I will say Shane Bieber did have success versus them last season, had quite a few 20-plus point outings versus them, and he is coming in hot. He had 14 strikeouts versus the Royals. Now, the Royals are obviously a much, much worse team than the Minnesota Twins, but the thing I liked about Shane Bieber is he threw nearly 100 pitches. He went, I believe, 97 exactly, had 14 strikeouts, and getting guys that can go deepish into games right now is something we should definitely have some interest in because a lot of these guys aren't going too deep into games. We're seeing guys with around 70 pitches, so Shane Bieber was around 100, and I'd have to assume there's a good chance he could break 100 here as long as he doesn't get blown up and has to leave the game early, which is not something I would expect from Shane Bieber. I mean, his numbers are overall elite. Vegas has 4.23 runs against him, which is actually pretty good considering he's going up against Minnesota. Minnesota's a team that's usually going to be over 5 as long as they're going up against an average pitcher, so Shane Bieber is getting respect in Vegas. 50% chance for the win, 7 strikeouts, and if you're looking at his numbers last season, he's got strong control, he's got a good strikeout rate. Did give up some hard contact with 1.3 home runs per 9 innings and a 42% hard contact rate, but overall his numbers are pretty good. His one struggle is power versus lefties, but he still has solid numbers versus them overall. 186 ISO is his one blemish, but 31% strikeout rate, 288 WOBA, 4.9 walk rate. I mean, I think Shane Bieber is going to be okay. I think he's probably more of a tournament option. I'm not totally sure I'm going to land in cash games or whatever yet because it's 12 in the morning the night of, or I guess the morning of if you want to call it that. But I could see him being more of a tournament play because people are going to be scared of that Twins lineup, which, trust me, I am too. I don't like using pitchers against the Twins ever. But I think Bieber should be able to rack up some strikeouts, probably go 6+ innings here as long as he's not getting just rocked. And he should have a solid outing. And again, he has a long leash, and he's one of the favorites to win the AL Cy Young Award. I mean, him, Garrett Cole, those kind of guys. So I like Shane Bieber. I think we're getting a good price here. Now, the matchup's brutal. I mean, there's no getting around that. Last season versus right-handed pitching, they had a 20% strikeout rate at 226 ISO, 343 WOBA, 112 WRC+. So the matchup sucks, but the matchup also sucks for the Twins. So you have to keep that in mind as well. So I do like Shane Bieber. As of right now, he feels like more of a tournament option, but I still think he's going to be fine either way. I like the long leash that he has. So And also, he's coming in very, very hot. We saw his outing versus the Royals. So going down to Nelson Lamet, he's 9,200, and I could see him being pretty popular. He just has that really soft matchup versus the Giants. Now, I prefer using lefties versus them, but still, I mean, Chris Paddock was a popular play tonight. I have not seen how that has finished because I've been prepping for this and getting ready, but I don't think he was doing too bad. Heaney wasn't doing too bad either. I think they were like around the same amount of points, but either way, Lamet, he actually had a pretty solid outing his first time out. He only threw 80 pitches, but he had 8 strikeouts. I believe it was versus Arizona, which is a pretty soft matchup as well. But San Francisco is obviously a very soft matchup, and there's definitely some strikeout upside here because he's a high strikeout kind of pitcher, and Vegas likes him. 3.69 runs against him. He's in a spacious pitcher's park in San Francisco. Now, if we're looking at his numbers last season, he had a 34% strikeout rate. Does have a little bit of control issues with the 10% walk rate, but still overall some pretty good numbers. And the Giants, they're worse versus lefties, but they're still very soft matchup for righties too. They only have an 87 WRC plus, 300 WOBA, 169 ISO. He's going to be fine. I think Lamet's going to have some decent ownership tomorrow. He's at 9,200. I mean, paying only 600 more for Shane Bieber does feel a lot better, but you're also going to be against Minnesota, which is a scary matchup. And he's on the road, so not like there's fans that can really influence that, but I think Lamet's going to be a pretty safe option here. If you're really scared of the Twins lineup, I think Lamet's a fine pivot. Sorry, I paused the video really quick because I added a pitcher I forgot I wanted to talk about. He's pretty risky, but we'll talk about him. You can see him at the end because he wasn't there before. But going down one more, we have Ross Stripling. He comes in 8,400. He's coming off a really strong outing last time out versus the Giants, where he went 7 innings. He had 7 strikeouts, and he had 92 pitches, which was very encouraging to see because guys that have been going deep into games, or not have, but guys that did go deep into the game on their first start is an encouraging sign because it gives them a little bit of a higher floor because some of these guys have not been going too deep into games. We've seen guys with like 70 pitches, 75. So, Bieber was around 100, Lamet was around 80, Stripling got to 92. So I like these guys with longer leashes, and he gets a pretty soft matchup here versus Arizona. And if you're looking at Stripling's numbers, I guess we should look at Vegas first. 4.3 runs against him, 60% chance for the win. If you're looking at his numbers last season, pretty respectable all around. 30% fly ball rate, 50% ground ball rate, pretty low walk rate at 5%, 25% strikeout rate, 3.58 xFIP. The numbers check out. Pretty solid versus both sides of the plate. If you're looking at the matchup for against Arizona versus righties, they struck out 21% of the time last season versus them. Had a 177 ISO, 314 WOBA, and only an 89 WRC plus, which is only 2 ticks above San Francisco. So this is a pretty soft matchup for Stripling here. He's going to be on the road, but I think he's a fine option. You could use him as an SP2. Honestly, you could make a case as an SP1, as I think really any of these guys are interchangeable. I mean, they're all like decent mid-range options. So Stripling's fine. I mean, he's never like an exciting guy, but he still had nearly 30 points in his first game. What was he at? 29.4. I was looking at his game log, so just to check the pitch count. So, yeah, I think he's fine. Do I think he's going to score 30 points again? Probably not, but I think he's decently safe on this slate. And then we have Dylan Bundy. He comes in at 8,200, and he's going up against the Mariners, which is a team I feel like I've been playing pitchers against all season long. Andrew Heaney actually ended up having a pretty solid game. He did give up a bunch of hits, and I believe he gave up a couple runs at the very end of his game, and I believe the Mariners actually got the lead off of like a Dylan Lewis home run, if I remember correctly. But I still like this spot for Dylan Bundy, and he's not the best pitcher in the world, but really he had a pretty solid outing for his first start of the year versus Oakland. He had 28.6 fantasy points, pitched nearly 7 innings, 7 strikeouts, 90 pitches, so he went pretty deep into the game. And this is just a good spot versus the Mariners. The Mariners have an overall pretty weak lineup, and if you're looking at their splits versus right-handed pitching last season, a near 26% strikeout rate, 100 WRC plus, near 200 ISO. So I like Bundy here. He's got a decent 23% strikeout rate, 4.58 xFIP, only 31% hard contact rate though, so he really limited that, but he did give up a lot of home runs at 1.61 home runs per 9 innings. But I think Bundy's fine, 8,200. I could actually see him being decently popular on the slate. Mariners are pretty big favorites here, 64% chance for the win, only 3.78 runs against Bundy. Or I guess just the Angels in general, because Bundy's not going to pitch the whole game. But I actually think he looks like a pretty solid option on this slate. Now, the guy that I added, it's Robbie Ray. He comes in at 7,100. Now, he is very risky because he's going against the Dodgers. But he also threw 97 pitches in his first game. I believe he struck out 7. And Robbie Ray is a guy that has upside, but he also has a lot of downside as well, because he can walk a lot of guys. And if he's off, he can get hammered. But he has plenty of strikeout upside here. Now, Vegas, 5.2 runs for the Dodgers. The Dodgers are one of the best teams in the league, but they're better versus right-handed pitching than they are versus left-handed pitching, and it's actually pretty drastic. They're super good versus righties, but lefties can have some success for them. And last year, Robbie Ray actually had quite a few good games versus the Dodgers, some 20-plus point outings. So I think he'll be okay here. He's pitching at home. Vegas has him at 7 strikeouts, which is pretty good. Now, is he likely to win this game? No, but he does have a 32% strikeout rate, obviously very good versus lefties. And most part, the Dodgers' great players are lefties. Max Muncy, Cody Bellinger. I mean, Jock Peterson's not great, but he's definitely got some pop. And then Corey Seager, so those kind of guys. Now he's going to see some righties in A.J. Pollock, Kike Hernandez, Justin Turner, Mookie Betts. So there's definitely downside here. I don't know if I'd really want to go there in cash games, but I think in tournaments, 7,100 for Robbie Ray seems like a pretty decent price for a guy with his strikeout upside. Now the matchup versus the Dodgers obviously is not good, but as you can see, they do have worse splits versus lefties. So 104 WRC plus to lefties compared to 116 versus righties, and so on. All the numbers are going to be much better for lefties than it is righties. So Ray, he's an interesting GBP option in my opinion, but I think now we can get on to the bats. And once again, there's a lot of fun bats in this slate, and we'll start with catcher with Gary Sanchez at 4,900. And the Yankees should end up being pretty popular again. They were very, very chalky last night. When I first made my video, I didn't think it was going to be that easy to fit in a bunch of Yankees, but ended up being very, very easy. I mean, the Royals are just so cheap every single night. Franco was 2K. McBroom was like 2K or 2.1K. I mean, it's pretty easy to fit these guys in because there's a ton of value options. Once again, the pricing has been pretty soft to start the season. I mean, some guys get priced way up, but there's a lot of guys that are just absolutely free for no reason. But the Yankees draw a matchup versus John Means, and last season I stacked against John Means a lot, but the guy just kept trolling me. I mean, the numbers would suggest he was getting super lucky because his xFIP was much higher than his ERA, and he was giving up a lot of hard contact, but he just kept having decent games, and stacking against him really didn't work out for the most part. But I think the Yankees continue to smash here. They had a really good game last night, and once again, they're going to have the highest implied team total. It's at 6.23 right now, and the Yankees absolutely smashed left-handed pitching. Sanchez has great numbers versus them, 2.63 ISO. I mean, you guys get it. The numbers are pretty good. Now, he actually had more power versus righties last season, but I don't think Means is going to last long in this game, and I think they get to that bullpen quick, and we know the Orioles bullpen's one of the worst in the entire league, so pretty much, if you're wearing a Yankees uniform tomorrow, you're definitely in play. If you're looking at John Means' numbers last season, you'd want the righties versus him, and they have plenty of good righties in this lineup. I mean, that's chock full of righty power, and give up a 200 ISO versus them, less than a 20% K rate, a lot of fly balls. So I like Gary Sanchez, obviously. It's just a matter if you have the salary for him. Christian Vasquez, I just absolutely hate playing the Red Sox, but whenever they're facing a lefty, I'm going to have some interest. Now, Steven Matz is not the worst pitcher in the world, and the Red Sox actually only have a 4.25 run total right now, which is pretty low. And, honestly, it's deserved because they just have not been hitting that well. But, of course, last night they scored 6 runs versus DeGrom. Now, they weren't off all versus DeGrom, but still, they've just not been that great at hitting so far this season. They did really well the first game versus the Orioles where they scored 10-plus runs, but outside of that, it's been pretty ugly for the Red Sox. But versus a lefty, the numbers check out. It's just a matter if they're actually going to translate because so far they really haven't so far for the Red Sox. But I like going against Matz here. I mean, he's not the best pitcher in the world, but he's also not the worst pitcher in the world. He's actually just pretty average. But Vasquez does have some pretty good splits versus lefty at 272 ISO versus them, 124 WRC plus, near 300 batting average. If you're looking at Matt's splits, he gives up a 194 ISO to righties, 22% K rate, but for both sides of the plate, he does give up some power. And, I like the righties here. It's gross to say they're not in Fenway, which is a downgrade, but I think the Red Sox are certainly in play. It's hard to trust them, and I totally understand that. Then we have Wilson Ramos. He comes in at 3,100, and I do like the Mets in the slate. Martin Perez did struggle in his first start versus the Orioles of all teams, the Orioles, so I can't imagine he's going to have the best of times here versus the Mets. They definitely have some right-handed power in their lineup that I would imagine he's going to struggle against. And looking at Ramos' numbers versus lefties, he doesn't have the most power in his bat, but he had a near 350 batting average versus them last season, a 12% strikeout rate, over a 420 on base percentage. That's all I can really ask for from a guy that's 3,100, just to make contact and give me a chance, and Wilson Ramos should certainly be able to do that. So I do think he is a pretty intriguing option, as all are the Mets righties. I think they're all in play here. If you're looking at Perez's numbers, he's got worse splits versus righties, which obviously makes sense. Most lefties do have worse splits versus righties. So Ramos, I think he's a fine option. Then Salvador Perez, he comes in at 2,600. Did absolutely nothing again, so that might just lower his ownership, but I feel like it's not going to, because I think everyone's going to play cheap Royals again because they pretty much unlock Yankee bats for you, which everyone's going to want Yankee bats, and people are going to spend up for other spots as well, so it just makes sense to like these cheap Royals. He's going to be batting cleanup or batting third. He's 2,600 going up against Ivan Nova. Now, Ivan Nova is a guy you typically want lefties against, but he's still got a really low strikeout rate versus both sides of the plate. Only 14% to lefties, 14% to righties. Gives up more power to lefties, but both sides of the plate are certainly in play here, and I like the price tag on the Royals once again. And they make one of the best value stacks on the slate. They have an implied team total of near 5. In the average salary of the starting lineup, I have a thing on my spreadsheet that calculates the average salary for the starting projected lineup and does the stacks and everything, but it's only 2,800 and they have an implied team total of 5, so they're going to grade out as one of the best value options on the entire slate once again, just like they did last night. Dropping down to first base, we have Pete Alonso. He's 5,100 going up against the lefty and Martin Perez. Prefer the righties versus him, and Pete Alonso just crushes baseballs for a living. I mean, he's got plenty of power versus lefties, 347 ISO, 141 WRC plus. You guys get the idea. Pete Alonso's got a very good chance of going deep in this game. He's just really expensive, and I feel like a lot of people are going to center themselves around some expensive Yankees bats, so he might go a little bit lower owned, but I do think he is a pretty decent tournament option. Then Luke Voigt, he actually did not get the start today, but they were also going up against a righty, so they put in Mike Ford, which does make sense. I had to assume he's going to be back in the lineup here versus lefty and John Means. And if that's the case, you got to have some interest, and he's actually decently cheap for being a Yankee, only 4,200, so I certainly think that makes him in play because a lot of these Yankees are super expensive. You got Torres at 51, you got LeMahieu at, what's he at? I think he's actually somewhat cheaper if I can find him on here. Oh yeah, he's only 4,400. But Sanchez is 49, Judge is 49, Stanton's 55. So he comes in at a pretty good price, and he should be hitting in the middle of the order. They have over a 6 implied team total. And I already said I like the righties here versus John Means. And Luke Voigt actually has more power versus righties, but I wouldn't shy away from anyone in the Yankees lineup. Then CJ Croney's 3,300. Now, I like him more versus lefties than I do righties for sure. I mean, he's got much better splits versus lefties, but he's still going to grade out as a pretty decent value option for me at 3,300. I mean, it's not like he's complete garbage versus righties. Obviously, he has much better splits versus lefties, but still, this Detroit and Kansas City game just once again presents really good value, and the Tigers have over a 5 implied team total, so you're actually just getting a lot of good value in this game, and it's pretty much the same thing as last night, pretty much. I think this slate's going to pretty much turn out the same, where everyone's going to be using Royals and Tigers bats to just round out their Yankee stacks for the most part, because the Yankees are super expensive, then you just fill in some bare minimum bare minimum Royals and Tigers bats, and it makes it just pretty much too easy to build, to be honest. So probably going to end up being a pretty similar slate. And speaking of cheap Royals, we have Ryan O'Hearn, 2,000, going up against the righty and Ivan Nova. I already talked about how he has worse splits versus lefties, and Ryan O'Hearn's got some pretty good splits versus righties. He is absolute trash versus lefties, as you can see. These are probably the darkest red bars you're going to see. I mean, he is just absolute trash versus them. But 200 ISO versus righties, so he's got some pop in his bat. He is literally free, so if you need some value, there you go, Ryan O'Hearn. Then dropping down to second base and also shortstop eligible, we have Gleyber Torres at 5,100. He really sucked last night. I believe he scored 2 points. I think did he get hit? No, he got a walk. Judge got hit at one point. But Torres got a walk, and I don't think he scored, so he did absolutely nothing, but he was very, very high owned. But that does not mean I don't want to go back to the well here. He's got pretty good splits versus lefties and righties. I mean, pretty much similar numbers overall. A little bit better versus lefties in the WRC department. Also a little bit better of a WOBA and on base percentage, but the whole entire Yankees lineup is in play here. I would not talk you off of any of them, and Torres obviously has a ton of power, and he had 13 home runs versus the Orioles last season. I know he crushed them, but I was watching the broadcast today, and they actually mentioned the exact number, and that was the most by any person against a specific team. So he's got a thing for Orioles pitching, and obviously their pitching sucks, so is their bullpen. So obviously I like Torres if you had the salary. DJ LeMahieu, he led off with the homer to start that game in Baltimore versus Wojciechowski. He doesn't have a ton of pop in his bat, but he's got some pretty good numbers versus lefties, to be honest. So 375 batting average versus them. 375, 182 WRC plus, 443 WOBA, 256 ISO. I think he's a pretty solid play here, like the righties versus John Means and LeMahieu's leading off, and we're actually getting a decent price tag on him too compared to all the other Yankees. So I do like LeMahieu. With Merrifield, he's 4,100. He just keeps producing. I prefer the lefties versus Ivan Nova, but I'm not shying away from anyone in this Royals lineup. Nova is not that great of a pitcher. The bullpen sucks for Detroit. And with Merrifield's fine versus lefties and righties, he has more power versus lefties, but he's got a 311 batting average versus righties and only a 17% strikeout rate. So, but Merrifield is a high contact hitter. He's got some pop in his bat as well, and he's got stolen base upside. So, do like Whit Merrifield and just part of that cheap Royals stack. Then we have David Fletcher. He's 3,200 going up against a lefty, and now his numbers aren't like amazing versus lefties, but he only has a 5% strikeout rate versus them, which is why I have interest, because if I can get a high contact hitter at 3,200, I will take it. And the Angels actually make for a pretty good stack tonight, 5.22 implied team total, which is pretty up there. And look, he's 3,200 and he's the leadoff guy. And if we look at Marco's splits last season, if I can find my spot, and I did, he gave a 151 ISO to righties last season, a less than 20% strikeout rate. I mean, he actually gave up a little bit more power to lefties, but I don't think I'm scared of anyone. I don't think I'm scared of Marco Gonzalez for anybody in this lineup. Mike Trout should be fine. Even Shohei Ohtani, Justin Upton, who actually has better splits versus righties, but Anthony Rendon crushes lefties, which we'll talk about very soon. So, yeah, I like the whole Angels lineup. I think they make for a good stack. Then we have Michael Chavis at 2,300. Unfortunately, I have a couple of cheap Red Sox here, but he's got good splits versus lefties, but I know this team just has not been hitting well recently. But 255 ISO versus lefties, he's fine. He's cheap. I'd probably prefer Jose Peraza here because he should be leading off, because last time they faced a lefty, he got the leadoff spot instead of Andrew Benintendi, who hit at the bottom of the order, and he's dirt cheap. He's a high contact hitter if you're looking at his splits versus lefties. He's a near 300 batting average, only an 11% strikeout rate. Obviously not a ton of pop in his bat, but he's somewhat interesting to me just because of the price tag and where he's going to be hitting in the order, but it's really tough to trust the Red Sox currently. Dropping down to third base, we only have a couple of guys here. I think you're either spending all the way up for Rendon, or what you're most likely doing is you're spending all the way down and just taking it for Maikel Franco. But we'll talk about it. So Anthony Rendon, 5,400, go up against Marco Gonzalez. Doesn't really throw a ton of heat whatsoever. And Rendon obviously crushes lefties, 301 ISO, 433 on base percentage, near 160 WRC plus, 316 batting average. Doesn't strike out a lot, only 15%. Gets a high walk rate. Yeah, he makes sense. He's very expensive, but look, the numbers check out. I don't really need to talk you through this too much. That's a really good lefty smasher versus a guy that doesn't really scare me too much in Marco Gonzalez, and I like the Angels tonight. So Rendon makes sense in full stacks. JD Davis, he's 3,700. I can't imagine he's going to have much ownership whatsoever, but if you're using a lot of Mets, it would make sense to at least have some interest in JD. Should be hitting around the cleanup position, and the Mets have a 5.25 implied team total, which is actually above the Angels, and he actually has some pretty good splits versus lefties, 139 WRC plus, 227 ISO. He's pretty good versus both sides of the plate, to be honest, but 312 batting average versus lefties last season. I think JD's fine if you're looking for a mid-range option at third, but what most people are going to do is they're just going to plug in Franco and move on. He's 2,000. He had a great night last night. He was facing a lefty, but he's still going to be fine here. I mean, his splits versus lefties are a little bit better, but he's 2,000. He's obviously got upside. I don't know why he's priced this low. He is not a 2,000 salary kind of player at all. Like, I don't understand why he's this cheap, but it's easy chalk just to fit him in at 2,000. I mean, just play him and move on for the most part. Really spend up at elsewhere positions or at other positions. Dropping down to shortstop, you have Ahmed Rosario at 4,700. Really only if you're using a lot of Mets, because I really like Mondesi at, 3,300, so I'll talk about him. But if you're using a lot of Mets, it makes sense to like Ahmed Rosario here. He's pretty good versus lefties, and like I said, Martin Perez is not the best pitcher in the world. He struggled versus the Orioles in his first start, and Rosario's got a 311 batting average versus lefties last season. Doesn't really strike out too much. Doesn't walk a lot either, but he's going to be leading off, and he's fine. Only in tournaments, though. Xander Bogaerts, 4,500. He's got good numbers versus lefties. Steven Matz doesn't scare me too much, but once again, like I said, the same thing about all the other Red Sox. I can't really trust them right now. I mean, they look good on paper, just the matchup-wise, but Vegas is starting to think that too. Only a 4.25 implied team total. I had to believe if that was in like a few games ago, it'd be much higher versus a lefty and Steven Matz. So, it's tough to trust him, but he's going to be hitting cleanup, 4,500. It's a decent spot for Xander Bogaerts. I mean, he's got good splits versus lefties. He's got a decent amount of power. Homered off a lefty so far this season already. But for the most part, I'm just envisioning myself probably dropping down to playing Alberto Mondesi if I'm looking for value. He's 3,300, and he had a pretty good game last night. He had a triple, got a run, and I forget what else he did after that, but definitely paid off his price tag just by that triple alone in the run. I believe they got him 10 points. And he's only 3,300. He's actually a better hitter versus right-handed pitching than he is versus lefties. If you're looking at his splits, you're going to see some red bars here versus lefties, and then you see some nicer shades of closer shades to green. You're still going to see some orange and yellows, but overall still better numbers versus righties. He's got a really high strikeout rate at 31%, but Ivan Nova, he just really struggles versus lefties. Only a 14% K rate, 203 ISO. And Mondesi's got not the most power in the world, but he definitely has pop and speed upside. So I do like Mondesi quite a bit, and I could see him end up being really, really popular at 3,300. Then dropping down to the outfield, we have Mike Trout, who's at an insane price tag of 6,100. He's actually a much better hitter versus righties than he is lefties, but that still doesn't mean he's bad versus lefties. He still has absolutely elite numbers versus lefties. A 430 on base percentage, 161 WRC plus, and a 300 ISO. Obviously good numbers all around. Better hitter versus righties, but I like the Angels, and obviously I had to like Mike Trout. I really just don't ever not like Mike Trout unless he's playing someone like Garrett Cole. But even then, he's not totally off the radar because he's Mike Trout. And then someone I think is going to be probably very, very popular. We have Giancarlo Stanton at 5,500. I could see people going to JD Martinez versus a lefty, but I think people are getting sick and tired of the Red Sox, and overall the Yankees are a much better stack on this slate, so I could definitely see Stanton having more ownership than JD, even though he's a little bit more expensive. But there's plenty of value to get him in, and Stanton versus lefties is just about as good as JD versus lefties. It's not quite that as good because, look at JD's numbers versus lefties, obviously off the charts, but Stanton's still really good versus lefties, and he keeps the ball in the air versus them as well. He only has a 16% ground ball rate versus them. And just overall elite power numbers versus left-handed pitching. I don't really have to spell it out for you guys. Power righty versus John Means, and I love the Yankee stack. Stanton, if he had the salary, obviously it makes sense. JD Martinez, 5,100, just keeps disappointing me while I play him. He's like 60% owned every single night, besides last night versus DeGrom, but he's usually uber chalk, and he just really hasn't done much whatsoever. But his numbers versus lefties, it's going to draw you back in because, they're too good. 482 ISO, 242 WRC plus, near 900. So, you guys get the idea. We're 400 batting average versus them. He's certainly in play. I would prefer spending up for Yankees around him, or instead of him, but he's fine as a one-off if you want to play JD versus a lefty because, again, like I said, numbers are fantastic. Aaron Judge, he's only 4,900. I can see him being one of the most popular plays on the slate because you're getting a 600 discount off of Stanton if you're using Judge. He's also 200 cheaper than JD Martinez, and everyone's going to want to play the Yankees. The Vegas total's high. Judge is great versus lefties. He's great versus righties. If you're looking at his splits versus lefties, they're like Stanton and JD, like 193 WRC plus, 343 batting average, near 700 slugging. The numbers are great. I like all the Yankees. Like I said earlier, if you're wearing a Yankees uniform, you're fine in my lineups. Don't mind. But I love Judge at 4,900. He also went deep tonight, too. It was a really high, I think it was a high fastball, and he just launched it. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Then you have Jorge Soler, 3,600. Took a big dip from 4,900 to 3,600, but there's just not much I like in that mid-range, so I could just see myself going like stars and scrubs like I think most people will do because you can totally just punt a lot of guys like Franco. You got Peraza, Ryan O'Hearn, and some other options as well that I probably left off, but yeah, for sure. Tons of good value options to be able to fit these guys in. But Jorge Soler, he's got a ton of power versus righties. Actually has more power versus righties than he does lefties. If you're looking at splits, 318 ISO versus them, 140 WRC plus, and your 600 slugging. I think he's an excellent play. I could see him end up being really popular on the slate as well. He was very popular last night. I think he was over 50% in cash games, and now he's going up against a righty, which he absolutely crushes. And the Royals make one of the best value stacks on the slate. Obviously, you got to like Soler here. He's got a ton of upside at this price tag. Kevin Pillar, 3,000. He's good versus lefties. He's got a 8% strikeout rate versus them, 241 ISO. I just hate going back to the Boston well, but they're certainly playable. It's really tough to trust. I view them more of tournament options because I think I just feel much safer with the Yankees and then going with the Royals for value. Then to end it, we have two Royals bats. We have Alex Gordon, 2,800. Nova really struggles with lefties. Alex Gordon is going to be hitting near the bottom of the order, but he's got decent splits versus righties. He's got 136 ISO, which isn't great, but 100 WRC plus, 275 batting average, 325 WOBA, but not too bad. So I think Alex Gordon is certainly playable at 2,800. And then Brett Phillips, another cheap lefty versus Nova. He's 2,000, going to be hanging at the bottom of the order, but if you need another pump play, he's fine. He's fine. So I think that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. This should be a pretty fun slate. I am looking forward to it. I see a lot of similarities from last night where you're going to be paying up for Yankees. You can throw the Red Sox in this time, and you're going to be looking for the Royals and Tigers as value once again, specifically the Royals. So hope this video was helpful, guys. If it was, remember to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, like I said, hit that subscribe button. Really appreciate it. It really does help me out. Leave a like, all that fun stuff. Comment below. And yeah, see you guys in the next video. And hopefully we can do a NASCAR video tomorrow. Depends when the salaries come out. Probably end up being more so on Friday. But yeah, we have that to look forward to as well. So I'll see you guys in the next video.